Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I, on behalf of School of Social Work, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, Coimbatore, warmly welcome you all for today's panel discussion on understanding climate action in the Indian context. I'm Namrata Varshini, and I'm the co-host for the evening, along with Mr. Jayasurya. And it's a great pleasure both to participate in the panel with our esteemed panelists and to welcome you all to this evening. As we all know, the climate crisis continues unabated as the global community shies away from the full commitment required for its reversal. Climate change is affecting every country in the world. If left unchecked, climate change will cause average global temperatures to rise beyond 3 degrees C and will adversely affect every ecosystem. We're already witnessing how climate change can exacerbate disasters and threats, and 2020's cocktail of hurricanes, wildfires, floods, and earthquakes is our cue to take climate action because doing nothing will end up costing us a lot more than taking action now. We have a green opportunity to take actions that will lead to more jobs, great prosperity, and better lives for all while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building climate resilience. Climate action means stepped up efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate induced impacts. India, being a signatory of Paris Agreement but with a high aspiration for development, has long ways to go. Climate action is one of the important sustainable development goals, that is goal number 13, and experts say combating climate change can reinforce all 17 SDGs. Today, we have 5 eminent panelists who are experts in various domains related to climate change and climate action among us to discuss about understanding climate action in the Indian context. The goal of this panel discussion is to highlight some of the pertinent questions relating to climate action and its implementation in India, while also nourishing young minds and inducing them to take urgent action to tackle climate change and its impact. Before moving on, I'd like to introduce and welcome our partnering organizations. South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis, SAPAC, is a rainbow coalition of organizations and individuals which was formed in May 2019 to bring together youth, women, farmers, workers, fisherfolk, scientists, and people from all walks of life who are concerned with impacts of climate change. Citizen Consumer and Civic Action Group, CAG, is a non-profit, non-political organization based in Chennai. CAG works focuses on consumer interest, public health, environment, and climate action. Kovilpalayam Neernilai Padugappu Amaipu is a local initiative based in Coimbatore. It's working towards the restoration and rejuvenation of wetlands in Coimbatore. At present, the group is engaged in the restoration of Kalingarayan Lake, which is in Annur Taluk of Coimbatore. With that, I welcome Dr. Emmanuel Daniel, Faculty Lead, School of Social Work, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, to deliver the welcome address and welcome our panelists.
Thank you so much, Namrata, for that energetic start. To tackle climate change, you don't have to reduce your quality of life, but you do have to change the way how you live. It was once said by Ken Livingston. Good evening, one and all. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the School of Social Work, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, Coimbatore. Today's panel discussion is on understanding climate action in the Indian context. Climate change has affected a number of countries, irrespective of being rich or poor, being a desert or on a good terrain. So it's been affecting the globe so much, and people are able to witness, the change in the level of, the ocean, the sea levels, climate change, and many things. And if this is going to continue, I'm sure the time is going to be very difficult for not just for us, but also for the generations to come. It basically affects the most poorest and the most vulnerable countries. And there's no doubt that it also affects our country, India. We from the School of Social Work, KCLAS, always try hard to organize programs which are more impactful for the society at large. For this particular event, we are very happy to collaborate with three eminent organizations working for climate action, climate justice. So they are Civic Action Group, South Asian People's Action on Climate Change, and Covid Palayam Neer Nilai Padugapu Amaipu. So these three organizations we were able to collaborate. So at this point of time, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our beloved principal, Dr. Vigila Kennedy, and Vice Principal, Dr. Shanti, who always encourages us, and they are the greatest inspiration for us to organize such programs. We welcome you. We also have amidst us Dr. Preeta KV, who is a faculty of social work and a program coordinator for this event. She will be moderating the panel discussion. So we welcome you, ma'am. We have eminent panelists. We have five panelists. Mr. Soumya Datta, former member advisory board, UN Climate Technology Center and Network. He's also the co-convener for South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis. We also have another four more panelists, Dr. Malati, Professor, Department of Social Work from University of Delhi. Panelist Ms. Akansha Tiwari, researcher, environmental and climate action, consumer and civic action group, Chennai. Ms. Anjali, young climate activist, Ashoka University, co-creator of Yugma Network and the project Amara and Yugma Network. So we also have another panelist, Mr. Nakul, research scholar, Ashoka Trust for research in ecology and the environment. So dear panelists, we wholeheartedly welcome you all. We have amidst us Mr. Vijay Babu, who's also a Coimbatore-based environmental activist. He's also one of the coordinators of Kalingarayam Kulam. It's basically a wetland rejuvenation and restoration project, and through which our college is also more involved in the lake restoration projects. We welcome you, sir. So I would also take this opportunity to welcome participants from various organizations and institutions. Hearty welcome, dear delegates. Finally, I would also like to welcome my own students from the School of Social Work. David Attenborough, in one of his quotes, said, "How could I look at my grandchildren in the eye and say, I knew what was happening to the world and I did nothing?" I'm doubly sure that this panel discussion, this particular event is going to be a meaningful time for us to examine and re-examine ourselves in terms of where we stand in, when it comes to climate action. What is our role in terms of climate action? Wish you all a fruitful and learning session. Thank you.
Dr. Emmanuel Daniel is the versatile faculty lead of School of Social Work, KCLAS. He has a collective experience of 10 years in teaching and research fields and has research experience in various fields of social work. But he is best known for constantly motivating his students and pushing them to realize their full potential. He trains his students with a vision to enhance their skills to become well respected social workers in the society. We warmly welcome you, sir. It's an honor to have you here. Now, it's time to move on to the panel presentation. Before we begin the discussion, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the moderator for the day and all our versatile panelists who will take you on a journey that will help you understand better about climate action. Our moderator for the day is Dr. Preeta KV. Dr. Preeta KV is working as an assistant professor with the School of Social Work, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science. Her PhD from Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai, focuses on the political ecology of developmental projects. She has more than 5 years of field and research experience in rural, urban, and tribal settings. Her main areas of interest include environmental policy and practice, environmental social work, and participatory research. Moving on, our five eminent panelists will focus on different aspects of climate action in the Indian context. Each panelist will talk for about 10 minutes and then we will move on with the discussion. Our first panelist is Mr. Soumya Datta, based in Delhi. Mr. Soumya Datta is an expert and activist on climate change and sustainable development. He is a former member in the advisory board of the UN Climate Technology Center and Network. He has been associated with many people's movement in India. He is the co-convener of SAPAC, founding member of India Climate Justice ICJ, and trustee in Movement for Advancing Understanding on Sustainability and Mutuality, MOSM. Today, he will be talking about what is climate action and why there's a need for it in India. Our second panelist for the day is Dr. Malati Al-Sumali. Dr. Malati is a professor with the Department of Social Work, University of Delhi. She has over 2 decades of teaching and grassroots experience of working with civil society groups in the disaster-affected areas of Andhra Pradesh. She has an enduring faith in anti-oppressive practice and has been associated with the atheist and humanist movements of the world. Her current research interests are working with mountain communities for sustainable development in the light of climate crisis, improving gender relations and disaster response. Dr. Malati's talk will focus on linkages of climate justice with social justice, differential vulnerabilities, and differentiated impacts and responsibilities and centrality of keeping the interest of vulnerable communities in climate actions. Following Dr. Malati, we have a third panelist, Ms. Akanksha Tiwari. Ms. Akanksha Tiwari works as a researcher with the Environment and Climate Action Team at Citizen Consumer and Civic Action Group. Her current work is focused on analyzing the water consumption in coal power plants and the process and impacts of decommissioning older units of coal power plants in India. Ms. Akanksha is a scholar under the Innovation in Science pursued for Inspired Research Scholarship for Higher Education. She will be explaining about the role of civil society organizations in climate action in India with special focus on CAG's work on climate action. Our fourth panelist, Ms. Anjali Dalmia, representing the young Z generation. Ms. Anjali Dalmia is a student of Ashoka University and young social and environmental activist. She is a member of NAPM, National Alliance of People's Movement, and SAPAC. Anjali has started her own initiatives, like she is the co-creator of Yugma Network, a pan-India youth initiative which works towards achieving ground-level environmental justice by contextualizing the discourse through local languages. The project Amara, a sustainable and equitable menstruation for all, and she's also a part of various local initiatives. She will be the apt speaker for us today to talk about youth and climate action. Our fifth and final panelist for the day is Mr. Nakul Mohan Heble. Mr. Nakul is a Bangalore-based PhD scholar at the Academy for Conservation Science and Sustainability Studies at Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment at TREE, affiliated with the Manipal University of Higher Education. His thesis is on the politics of climate action in India at the intersection of climate, development, and human well-being. His recent article titled, "We Need to Save India's Climate Action from Its Perverse Consequences" in Science Wire grabbed attention of climate experts. His talk will focus on the crossroads of climate action, highlighting the undesirable outcomes of climate action projects in India. I now take pleasure in welcoming Dr. Preeta, faculty, School of Social Work, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, to moderate the discussion.
A very good evening to all. Thank you, Dr. Emmanuel, for a wonderful welcome note. And thank you, Namrata, for the great introduction to the panel discussion and introducing our panelists. So without any time, now I invite Mr. Soumya Datta to deliver his talk. He will be discussing on what is climate action and why there is a need for it in India. Over to you, Mr. Datta.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Namaskar to everyone. And thanks to Kumaraguru College for organizing this. I think for young minds, young students who are learning this, and also for teachers who are regularly interacting with them, a deeper understanding of these issues are very critical standing today. When we are not seeing a climate change, but actually we are facing a climate crisis. So let me go quickly into the climate actions that we have started in a few areas, but in a large segment of Indian economy, Indian livelihoods, Indian lives, we have not yet started. And just touch different sectors, because these are so vast. Even if you talk about one sector, it will take one day. As we do workshops, and as we are also putting both in the UN platform where I am interacting for the last 14 years, and in the national and South Asian forums where I am doing this work for the last 22 years. So let me go into the sectors of, in India, what are the kind of climate action major areas. I am not talking about micro areas, micro changes. I'm talking about major areas and where change will be required and action will be required at multiple levels, right from policy and plant levels to people in the industry level to people living on the ground at that level. So one sector that everybody talks about is a truncated sector of energy. When people talk about transition from fossil fuels, today 68% of India's electricity comes from coal. 56% of India's total energy basket, primary energy, comes from coal. 10 to 12% comes from electricity, from hydroelectricity, and rest others, various sources. The renewable supply around 5%. So that's a minor percentage even after 15 years of development. So we need rapid action and we need massive action. But this is one sector everybody talks about. When you talk about climate action, people talk about renewable energy, energy transition. But it's not just that, it's far, far larger than that. But before going into that, let me just quickly touch, even during the transition, because we have seen in any major energy technology or any technology transition over the last 230, 40 years, what we have seen, a major transition takes anywhere between 60 years to 95 years from the start, from the beginning of the innovation to where at least 80% of the use in the world is on that new system or new energy or new technology. So that's called transition. So that takes anywhere between 60 to 95 years. So solar, which started in the last century, it's high time that it is going to be matured. It is expected, it was expected. So it will be going on even on the economic sense. But it's just the transition period. As I said, if 68% of India's electricity comes from coal, to transition away from coal, it's not only setting up wind and solar simultaneously, you'll have to keep on supplying those. And one of the major impacts of climate is on water, hydrological cycle. Coal and nuclear power are major consumers of water as consumptive use because of cooling and because of the consumptive use of evaporation. So on the one hand, climate crisis, increasing climate crisis is causing a stress on water availability by disrupting the hydrological cycle. On the other hand, our very high dependence on coal, and if nuclear, as the government is planning, nuclear is even more water intensive. Forget about the pollution. So this is a major challenge that we are still not fully understanding, but as some people here, I think, are talking about. For the solar and wind transition, the transition has started, but we have to understand the model it has started in. It's actually aggravating the injustices that we are talking about, that coal, hydro, nuclear, and the major economic model of centralization, of dispossessing and displacing people in the bottom. So these injustices actually are continuing because the same big corporate owners who used to run the coal power plants are now going and setting up a lot of solar power plants. People are still getting displaced. Their land is being taken. So a transition, a climate action is needed with the justice and equity angle in centrality, that this energy transition, even in the limited sense of energy transition, and here I'm talking about energy in a very limited sense of electricity. Energy is much larger than that. We have to understand that for India, electricity contributes in terms of electricity, we consume only about 18% of total primary energy basket. So rest 82% is still there. We have to still do. Just a solar power plant will not change that. So that is a major area that we have not yet started to tackle majorly. So one is a change of model from corporate-owned, centralized, mega scale to more community-owned, community-controlled, distributed, smart grids-based, local grids. That model, that kind of climate action, we are not seeing in India, though the seeds are there. There are models in different places. Next, let us come to, these are all I'm talking about, these are in the energy sector. Next, there is a huge plan in India by the government of increasing hydropower without understanding properly that the climate crisis that is happening is actually disrupting the hydropower sources also. In fact, if you see the ISRO data, Indian Space Research Organization, from 1985 to 2000, Indian Himalaya snow and ice store, every year there was an average loss of 4 billion tons, 400 crore tons. From 2000 to 2015, that has gone up to 8 billion tons plus, 800 crore ton plus. 2016 onward, it has gone even more. So with warming, the annual net loss of snow, ice, water storage is going down drastically. In this scenario, if we plan to do climate action through big hydropower plant, this will be doubly impacting. Plants will become useless, and a lot of land will get wasted, and will create more disasters in terms of, recently you have seen those disasters. Globs are increasing. I'll come to disasters and climate extremism in later. But this is in terms of energy. The other areas that we need to understand in the climate action, which is immediate, that we must not focus only on solar and wind, because renewable energy, carbon-free energy can be a multiple. It can be geothermal, it can be ocean thermal, it can be wave, it can be tidal, it can be a multiple thing. And this electricity focus or electricity centrality also has to go, because a lot of energy needs for domestic use, commercial use, and industrial use is in the form of heat, not in terms of electricity. And a lot of the natural sources can be directly tapped from heat. So that's a major climate action side, that our economic focus and industrial focus, keeping the climate crisis in view, will have to change. I'll not go into details. Let me come to the second segment. Industry and manufacture is backbone of any country that wants to go a little ahead, give a lot of employment. Agriculture, also agriculture, I'll come next later on. But industry, agriculture is always any country that goes above, a little above on economic ladder. Industry and manufacturing plays a major role, not only in economy, not only in GDP, but also providing jobs, providing well-paid jobs, secure jobs. So in industry and infrastructure, or just if I say manufacturing, what are the key things? What are the backbone? Steel, aluminium, cement, bricks, plastics, that is petrochemicals, glass, paper. So these areas, if you look at steel, whether it is magnetite or hematite, to take from the ore and make iron and then steel, you need a huge amount of carbon to be burned, not only in terms of the energy, but also for the oxide ore, the hematite or magnetite. If you have to convert it, you have to convert it through carbon. So entire new chemistry of steel making, and steel is one of the backbones of any economy, any modern economy. You have to change the entire backbone. That chemistry has to be changed. New manufacturing processes, the new industrial processes, new supply chains has to be changed. Next, come to cement. Cement, in the process of manufacturing, again, because it is from limestone, limestone is CaCO3. If you have to make it first lime, clinker, you have to take out the carbon dioxide. So again, in the process of manufacturing, the carbon dioxide emission is included, and then the energy that it needs, huge amount of energy, that again is carbon dependent. So again, new chemistries which are now being developed, which is already a couple of new technologies has been developed, but to bring those technologies into industrial scale, to transform an entire cement industry. India steel production is 101 million, 110 million tons now capacity. Cement capacity is 545 million tons. So these are huge, massive changes that we are talking about. And these we don't understand. These are part of the necessary climate action, because we don't change the steel process and chemistry. If we don't change the cement production, chemistry and the technology, we cannot make zero carbon economies. That's impossible. So next, come to aluminium. Aluminium is the commonly known material which is the most energy intensive. And in this energy, again, we'll have to go out of this carbon energy. Second impact of aluminium is bauxite is a mineral which holds water very well. Every mountain, every terrain that has bauxite holds water, gives out rivers. So if you have to do large scale bauxite mining, you will have to damage lot of pristine forest, lot of sources of rivers. So we need to change the chemistry of aluminium making, need to develop new technologies, need to develop new aluminium industrial method if we have to keep on using aluminium, which is one of the backbones. Come to petroleum. Petroleum, everybody knows, oil, gas, coal are the three things that are causing damage. So the entire petroleum, apart from even the fuel, which I'll come to transport, The petrochemicals industry today is one of the major backbones in terms of products, services, supply, support structure, everything. So we need to shift away from petroleum, but what will come to support some 50 to 60,000 products and services, we still have not focused enough. So that's a major action that we have not yet probably seriously started. Let me not go into details. Let me go into the third area, which is uh, agriculture, which is extremely important. Agriculture today, I don't know whether people understand. Agriculture today, to produce every calorie of food grain or other food, if it is a food grain, we need 6 to 7 calories of external energy input. And 80% of this energy input comes from fossil fuel in terms of mechanized agriculture, in terms of fertilizers, in terms of transportation, everything. So if we have to have really climate friendly agriculture, we have to really completely go away from the energy intensive, chemical intensive mode of agriculture. And this means something like 70 crore people in India who still practice agriculture. 90% of India practices chemical intensive agriculture. That's the reality. Even in the villages, they provide fertilizers. They often use tractors, and to take their things out, they use again tractors and trucks. So this huge energy dependence of agriculture, the fossil fuel dependence on agriculture, because gas and naphtha are also major feedstocks for fertilizer. We have to have major changes in agriculture. The other major climate action that is needed, as I said, hydrological cycle is critically connected with agriculture. 60%, almost 60% of Indian farming is still dryland farming. Wherever there is irrigation, those groundwater sources are drying out over after 30, 40 years of intensive use. So we need to change the entire pattern of agriculture, which is irrigation intensive, chemical intensive, energy intensive. And this is a major challenge. And that's also connected because of the increased in variability of rainfalls. Sometimes it rains too much. There was a 100-year study of monsoons by India Meteorological Department, which showed earlier till around mid 80s, total rainfall in the year used to happen in 44-45 days. Roughly the same amount of rainfall now is happening in 23 to 25 days. That means when it rains heavily. When it do not, it's a dry period. And that's a major challenge for agriculture. Not only floods and droughts, it's a major challenge for agriculture. So that needs tackling. Let me quickly go into the fourth segment. Mobility and transportation are very important for any civilization. We cannot, if we are not prepared to go back to before 7,000 years, because as we know, urban civilization started around 7,000 years back in Mesopotamia, Eridu, Ur, Uruk. These are the areas where urbanized civilization started, which we call civilization, because we don't call farming societies as civilized societies, though that's a debatable question. But when the urbanization started, right from that point, mobility, transportation is one backbone. Today, 90% of our mobility depends on fossil fuels. 90% plus. I'm saying 90%. Some estimates go up to 95% plus. So if we have to go out of fossil fuels, we have to invent and not only entire model of entire class of mobility devices, cars, buses, ships, railways, everything. This can run on electricity. Some can run on electricity. But electricity, the moment you go into batteries, there is another whole class of problems that come in, another challenges, technologies. I'll not go into details of that. But we also think of new models where economic progress, social progress, political freedom, everything are not so dependent on mobility, extensive mobility, which can now some of these are happening, but this is not a desirable model also. So we need rethinking of our urbanization model, rethinking of our complete dependence on mobility and transportation. And this is not only for people, this is for everything that we consume. I'll not go into detail. The one major challenge is air travel. Air travel, if you can comparatively easily shift train and buses to electric mobility. It's difficult, but even ships and all you can probably do to electric mobility. For air travel, it's now impossible. In the future, it will be for very small planes, etc. It might be possible, but how do you do? whether you will be able to do air travel in a carbon friendly way. Major challenges, major climate actions. Let me go quickly into the next section. One is the climate disaster or climate extreme events. I'll come quickly this, and the next is supply chain, and then I'll stop because there are huge areas I won't be able to go. It takes 4 or 5 days to just even go a little deep into this. So one is the extremes. What are the kind of climate extremes that are increasing in India, has already increased in India? One major thing that we have seen over the last 40 years, number of big tropical storms, heavy rainfall events and flooding have gone up by 2.6 times. So 2.6 times, 260 percentage points. And this is a UNISDR data, International Disaster Database data. So you can check it. These are causing massive damages. Most impacted are South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. South Asia means India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, Afghanistan, all together, Sri Lanka. So connected thing, a major climate action challenge for India is to not to differentiate between South Asian countries, because the climate of South Asia is integrated by 3 or 4 very clear natural events. One is the Himalayas. It's there for all. It impacts our climate for all of South Asia. The 3 seas, Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean. These impacts the entire climate cycle of the entire South Asian region and beyond. And the southwest monsoon. It's not Indian monsoon, it's the South Asian monsoon. So these 3 dominate our climate and agriculture and industry and water resources, everything. You know about water towers of Asia. So with climate crisis, there is a major disruption in this. After 2014, India-Pakistan problems has stopped the SAARC process. There are some cooperation. There are 2 declarations. One declaration, one statement. Dhaka Declaration, Thimphu Statement, which are on climate change. Up to 2014, I was also involved in those processes till 2014 in the People's SAARC in Kathmandu. After that, this process stopped. But can you imagine any country in South Asia taking a climate action without involving the neighboring countries? Pakistan effectively has one river, Sindh. So and Sindh, unlike Ganga, Yamuna, Son, Koshi, Sindh's major water supply comes from snow and ice in the Himalayas. The way it is going down, and if you do not think about cooperation, Sindh Indus River Water Treaty is there, unfortunately. But without these 2 countries maintaining the treaty, no other country, no one country can do it. India, Bangladesh share 54 transboundary rivers. Can you imagine taking action, climate action on one river without Bangladesh getting affected? Or Bhutan taking an action without India getting affected? Or Nepal taking an action without India getting affected? It's not possible. So one of the major climate actions that we must not forget is we must restart very good cooperation. Forget about the politics. Let's skip the rhetoric. I don't mind. But the cooperation in terms of climate action, ecological action is a must. And let me talk about in this fashion, the climate and climate disaster don't respect any political boundary. If a GLOP happens, glacial lake outburst flood, which is happening increasingly because of the warming, if that happens in Nepal, it will not spare India. If that happens in Bhutan, it will not spare India. If that happens in Indian Tista, it will not spare Bangladesh. So we cannot really isolate India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, take Indian context, has to be South Asian context. I want to emphasize this point. And there are multiple things. Major impacts are happening. Heat index, which is a high combination of high temperature, high humidity. It's killing tens of thousands of people in southern part of India and the Gangetic Gangetic Basin. These are the areas maximum impacted by heat index. Heat index is different from heat stress. It's combination of high humidity and high temperature when your body cannot cool itself by sweating. And this is killing manual workers, thousands of them. And India has around 30 manual workers, hawkers, rickshaw pullers, porters, many of them. So we have to think about them and what kind of action you take to keep this. Actually, those who are the nation makers, the construction workers, these are the nation makers. How do you safeguard them? So that's a major action. And I will not go into details again, but the number of cyclones has not increased much. The intensity of cyclones has gone up quite a lot, and it will keep going up because the sea surface temperature is increasing. The change that has happened in the last 5 years, when the Arabian sea surface temperatures are increased, so now the Arabian Sea is seeing pre-monsoon strong cyclone every year. It's a change. For the last 40 years, it has not happened. Now it's happening. It will intensify. So the climate action, the preparedness, very few signs of that, except evacuation and relief. We need to prepare beforehand. There are a whole lot of others. I will not go into this. The last I want to point out in 1 minute is the logistics and supply chain, which is the backbone of industry, services, even the small scale, even the informal sector. So this is getting disrupted by climate cycles, by water, by the heat, everything. So we have not yet started thinking about that. So I'll say that these 7 sectors or 8 sectors, major sectors of India, not only the industry, economy, people, and governance. We must start thinking about that. It's already late. Let's not be too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Datta, for your highlighting the 5 important sectors like energy, agriculture, and urbanization, which are contributing more to the climate change. So now I invite Professor Maladi Atsumali from Department of Social Work, University of Delhi, to talk about social and environmental justice aspects related to climate action. Over to you, Dr. Maladi.
Warm greetings to one and all, and thank you, Dr. Preeta, for inviting us. And I am really thankful to the organization Kumaraguru Department of Social Work of Kumaraguru Liberal Arts College, Coimbatore, for inviting us for this important discussion. And it's actually a very humbling experience to share our thoughts, because we see a large potential for the future just waiting for us in terms of our students, and we want to invest our energies in our students. And I think the organization is doing very well with regard to preparing the students for this very, very important challenge that we are currently facing. So I begin with the understanding of what is this kind of a climate justice and social justice, the linkages, the vulnerabilities, whether they are differentiated vulnerabilities of people who are exposed to climate change events, as Mr. Datta has mentioned about climate extremes. And so what kind of differentiated impacts, differentiated vulnerabilities, and hence a kind of a differentiated actions which are needed to be done. Do these vulnerabilities have actually stemming from the existing socially inequitous social structure that we have with us? And do they accentuate these difficulties further on such groups of people? The other point is that, so what shall we do to prepare ourselves? And how do we want to involve such groups of people in collective actions? So those are the points that I thought I would be sharing some of my ideas on. So when we start looking at climate justice and social justice, we would definitely say that when we say climate justice is trying to see that there is a kind of what you call equality in terms of distribution, and in terms of procedural and distributive justice with respect to mitigating the effects of climate change, or even to help in adaptation procedures. So we see how can that be actually, will that help such groups of people who are traditionally been seen as marginalized. Now, I speak from the experience from Uttarakhand, particularly my work with the Forest Rights Act with communities in Uttarkashi district in Bhatwari block. So we see the differentiated vulnerabilities with regard to communities who are forest dependent, and these forest dependent communities, they would the pathways to the forest were cut off with climate extremes, or there is dwindling forest resources. So what kind of livelihoods or what kind of food safety needs they would be meeting, because they are all dependent on some of them majorly from uncultivated foods also, and also medicines and water resources from the forests. And so what sort of impacts would be there, and if they are the ones who are not part of the picture of livelihoods frameworks that the government or institutional mechanisms have in place, or they do not figure in this, then naturally they will be facing lots of vulnerabilities. We have seen the experience from 2013 disaster in Uttarakhand, where the people have been clamoring what we call for Sadak Samman. That means they wanted what you call respect for their individual dignity and communities. They didn't want charity to be given. So there is also an idea in terms of, when we do climate actions, do we really ensure the dignity of the communities in question? So vulnerabilities are gendered. Vulnerabilities have an effect on the marginalized, in terms of whether you possess a land, you do not possess a land, whether you are a footloose labor and you could actually go and work in as a migratory group. You could go from one city to another in search of work. And how does that again impact on your what you call survival needs? Because when we say climate change, it is also impacting on the urban areas, and as Mr. Datta has pointed out about climate extremes impacting on the cities also, extreme heat stress and so on. And if these are the groups of people who are going into construction work and labor force, which are in quotes footloose and cheap labor, and in addition to the kinds of systems which are in place, which call exasperate these inequalities in terms of their vulnerabilities via institutional processes. So vulnerabilities, certain groups will be more, if whether I can access food needs, I can go to a shelter because I have my own mode of transport, or do I have to depend on public transport, which will be disrupted because of some kind of a climate extreme or disruption in the connectivity and networks and so on. So if we even say that institutional responses in terms of providing for such groups with regard to, say, for example, food coupons, e-coupons and e-registration processes, then there is an underlying assumption that these e-coupons could be what you call accessed because there's an underlying assumption of having a particular smart device or having that kind of a digital access. So the vulnerability can be enhanced even if we are seeing that response mechanisms which are there by the institutional processes. So there is a need to recognize the communities and their vulnerabilities. And we also want to see how such vulnerabilities will be sort of dealt with. How do we want to understand? Is it vulnerability understood from a kind of a top-down process, or is it understood from the community perspectives? So when we actually want to say climate justice and social justice, I want to say that there can be no climate justice without social justice. And when we want to see that centrality of keeping the interest of the vulnerable communities in climate actions, so what kind of vulnerability mapping, what sort of intention, and with what changes do we propose? Who should be prepared? What sort of knowledge systems interface is taking place between the communities at the local level and between the experts and the kinds of technical groups, as also the institutional processes which heavily are dependent on certain what you call cultural capital. So even though we recognize that when we talk about communities by the term itself is not homogeneous, based models for sort of looking at climate actions, which they also need to be seeing this kind of power differentials within communities and take that into consideration. So I want to stress that we need to build something called an inclusive, democratic, transparent, participatory processes, because that will be the one which is key to achieving social environmental justice. We have experienced the problems with this kind of being non-inclusive, non-democratic, non-transparent issues, even in the current COVID crisis. And we need what we when we say democratic process, then are we ensuring those processes to be at place, and are we challenging the powers or power exercises at the local level? That must also be in our thought process when we are going to work with communities and community vulnerabilities. So we say, when we say we democratic ideas, I believe that we would like to see that there are multiple realities, multiple perspectives. There is a need for consensus building. There is a need for respect and recognition, and also sincerity of purpose. The actions which are being spoken of, those, what are the kinds of intent that we have? So do we respond in terms of knee-jerk reactions, and so the extremes are coming, so we respond, or do we, how prepared are we, and how do we want to prepare the kind of resilience in the communities? So we need a kind of a collaborative partnership. Mr. Datta has spoken of a kind of a cooperation between nations and so on, and I'm trying to say that there is a need for what you call coalition building across different institutional sectors and across different stakeholders and players, and that is the way in which we would be able to prepare for and respond. So, in terms of future preparation, I would say that if we want our future to be peaceful, humane, we want it to be considerate and responsive to those in need. Something like I have felt that it's like an affirmative action. We need to be looking at the kind of vulnerable groups and be responsive to them, and that needs to be institutionalized. These kinds of preparations must start now. So what such preparations could be? One is this knowledge systems, because we have plenty of knowledge which is coming from experts, and how do we want to clarify these issues at the ground level, at the local community level, and what sort of assumptions, directives, power issues that we must contend with, and how do we want to incorporate the kind of locally sourced knowledge systems in a kind of systematic way, and how do we want to shape the same in terms of dissemination of knowledge in collectives, networks for action and integration. And also we need to have the kind of an accountability mechanisms, which is a major governance challenge, I do believe. And the sort of thing, what kind of components the knowledge at these kinds of knowledge interfaces will be, which will be helping us to inform of our climate actions, national, local, and sublocal levels. And I believe strongly that livelihood analysis in a particular geoclimatic conditions, for a start, we need to do that, looking at the social factors, demographic changes, and also identifying the vulnerable, because that's the way we prepare. We prepare to see who are the ones who need to be saved, who are the ones who need to be supported, and with what kind of mechanisms. I think I can end this with this thing: eternal vigilance is the price of democracy, and eternal vigilance is much needed for informing our climate actions and responding to these at institutional levels, at community level, and at knowledge systems level. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Malati. Thank you, Professor Malati, for enlightening us about the differential vulnerabilities and the need to recognize such vulnerabilities. As you rightly said, there is no climate justice without social justice. That is, again, a big challenge for India. So moving on, our next panelist is Ms. Akanksha Tiwari, a researcher from CAG, and she will be talking about the role of civil service society organizations in climate action in India. Over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you, Dr. Preeta. I would like to thank Kumaraguru College and CAG for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this wonderful panel today. I am sharing my screen. I hope I'm audible and this is visible on everyone's screen. Dr. Preeta?
Yes, yes, you can proceed.
Thanks. Good evening, friends. I wish everyone Happy World Environment Day in advance. The theme for this year is ecosystem restoration, which is a climate action in itself. Today, we are at an inflection point. COVID-19, the climate crisis, and degradation of our ecosystem have forced us to rethink normal and created a new world of possibilities. That's why I'm here to speak about the role of civil society organizations on climate action. I take this opportunity to introduce our organization, Citizen, Consumer, and Civic Action Group, CAG, which is a non-political NGO that works towards promoting good governance processes that includes transparency, accountability, and participatory decision-making. Coming to the topic now, if anyone needs a crash course in the critical role played by civil society organizations, COVID-19 is providing it. Whether it is pandemics, climate crisis, natural disasters, civil society organizations are the drivers of the change. The civil society is not affiliated with or directed by the government, thus they are called non-state actors, which play a crucial role in creation, enforcement, and review of policies for bringing up changes at system level, community level, and individual level. For example, Goonch, which is providing its social services towards demystification of myths and realities around disasters, and it helps in relief and rehabilitation of disaster hit people in Tamil Nadu and other states of India based on funding. It receives its funding from foreign funders or general public like you and me. Thus, it is a civil society. Like that, many civil society organizations came together and helped the migrant workers during the pandemics. According to World Health Organization, civil society is a broad term that represents charities, development NGOs, community-based groups, women organizations, faith-based organizations, professional associations, trade unions, social movements, coalition, and advocacy groups. The Indian Constitution does not contain the term civil society, and NGO is the legal term which is used by Indian government. The RTI Act mentions NGOs as public authority. However, only the NGOs financed substantially directly or indirectly under appropriate government will only be considered as public authority under RTI Act and cannot be considered as civil society as per the definition of term civil society. For example, Care Trust, which is working towards monitoring the impacts of human activities on wetlands, forest, and marine biodiversity in Tamil Nadu, is funded by Tamil Nadu government for each of its projects. Hence, it is a public authority. Therefore, the NGOs, charities, etc., which receive foreign funding and are not considered as public authority under RTI Act, should be recognized as civil society by Indian law. However, no steps has been taken as of now. The previous speakers, respected Someda and Dr. Malathi, have explained very well about climate actions. Let us understand how civil society influences climate actions or what role they actually play. The civil society generates awareness and contributes in policy making in the favor of communities to reduce their vulnerability due to climate change. Research and activism is the another work area to make legitimate demand from governments, such as decommissioning of old thermal power plants for timely and effective climate actions. Civil society supports grassroots movements to raise up discussions or consideration on climate actions. They make a healthy network with important action groups which can help in influencing climate actions. They organize joint or individual programs and campaigns to reach out and involve society for undertaking climate actions. They monitor the effectiveness of climate actions by integrating stakeholders such as private sectors or some volunteering groups in doing so. They give voice to different local groups and ensure acknowledgement of their high vulnerability in public policy through policy advocacy. The civil society creates and distributes reports, blogs, posters, etc. for capacity building on climate actions. Basically, the civil society organizations have the power to influence individual behaviors, government, and the institutions that are involved in undertaking climate actions. The most practical example I can give about the role of civil society is of CAG itself. The Environment and Climate Action team of CAG is working on the Thermal Watch initiative from past 6 years. It is our initiative to examine the challenges in mitigating and adapting the environmental changes, to develop stronger institutional and participatory processes, to overcome challenges to environmental protection, and to build the capacities of local communities to strengthen their ability to cope with environmental hazards. Through this Thermal Watch project, we aim to assist the local communities in monitoring the industrial pollution, and we provide training to impacted communities to ensure industrial compliance with prescribed standards and norms. Also, we help small local groups in their struggle against upcoming projects which can destroy their livelihood and ecosystem. We have created and distributed handbooks, animation videos, and online toolkits on environmental impact assessment. Recently, we have created a video on disaster resilience for coastal communities, which will be available on our CAG YouTube channel very soon. To sort of help the civil society and impacted communities, we provide operational status of thermal power plants and documents like environmental clearance, environmental statement on this map, which is available on our Thermal Watch website. Our team had started air quality monitoring during the 5th phase of TWI project, and we are continuing this work to demand for continuous air monitoring in the highly polluted areas surrounding the coal-based thermal power plants in 4 districts of Tamil Nadu. Talking about the recent works of our Environment and Climate Action team of CAG, we helped organizations and activists in diversification of energy financing by organizing energy finance workshop in 2020 with CFA. Our team have prepared reports on decommissioning, disaster management, sustainability guidelines, and temperature and rainfall analysis for the last 100 years. Our team organized a campaign with Jhatka organization, which was signed by 27,381 individuals to be very precise, and a national consultation on draft TIA 2020. Our team had participated as speakers in the UN 75 initiative dialogues on SDGs. It was a youth-led initiative by Confederation of Young Leaders, and our team had sensitized college students on topics like coal financing and sustainability lifestyle during this event. Our team have filed RTIs to get important documents to check the compliance of coal-based industries with emission norms. Our team have written advocacy letters and created posters and videos on activities which have far-reaching impact on environment and climate. Our team shares articles on the social media handles of TWI and CAG to spread the message about climate, energy, and environment policies and relevant issues to a larger audience. This is a screenshot of one of our blogs. You can find, download, and read them on our CAG website, and some of them are available on the Thermal Watch website. This is an image of our campaign with Jhatka organization. It shows that 27,381 people had signed and sent a demand for scrappage of draft TIA 2020, and it was a well-received effort as it helped in postponement of this draft. And you can see here the New Indian Express had published about our national consultation on draft TIA 2020. As an individual, you can also help the civil societies by reflecting on your lifestyle choices, switching to sustainable alternatives based on self-reflection processes, demanding systematic changes to have an inclusive, greener future. So reflect, switch, and demand. With this positive note, I end this presentation. You can ask queries during Q&A, and you can check our Thermal Watch and CAG websites and social media handles. I have provided details in the slide. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Akamsha, for sharing the work of CAG and how CAG is engaging with civil society in various climate action activities. Moving on, our next panelist is Miss Anjali Dalmia. She's a youth social and environmental activist from Ashoka University, and she will be talking about the youth and climate action. Over to you, Anjali.
Thank you, Dr. Preetha. I hope everyone can hear me. So I will just be mainly building on everything that has been already said, because there are some amazing points that were brought out, which I would like to take further. So before we start, I want to first ask. I think it's a very basic question when it comes to climate action, which is that why are youth even needing to fight for this? Why are we even having to fight for something like basic rights, for something like rights for the next generation? We are all talking about it, but yet we seem to be keep needing to reiterate what we're saying and to keep fighting for it. And there is still such little action from those who are actually in the policy making and in the decision making places. So I think that is just one point that I want to really highlight to begin this talk, especially considering climate change and climate crisis, as Soumya said, is going to be impacting us youth, the next generation, the most. There was a quote somewhere where I read which said, the older generation will just have to live through it. You'll just have to get through it. But we are actually going to be living through the reality of the climate crisis, our generations and the generations to follow. So that is one big point that I want to start off with. The other thing I want to mention is that when we talk about youth and when we say youth activism, it's really important to think about who we're referring to when we say youth. Sometimes we think about youth as, one homogeneous sort of group, that all youth can get clubbed under youth. But many times we leave out those who are, one, the most affected, who are also fighting for climate justice and for social justice. And two, youth activists are not just those who are active on social media, who have access to these platforms, who have access to visibility. It's many of the time those people who are actually working on the ground, who are really working in their localized areas and working for change and for some action. And they are also, so our definition of youth has to be a lot more inclusive when we say youth activism or youth activist. That was one more point I wanted to bring up. And to all of the adults, so to say, who are listening into the talk today, I want to really ask, which is, why is there so much hesitancy to hand over to the youth and to hand over to a new way of thinking and of being? Where is that hesitancy stemming from, considering the youth is going to be the next generation who's going to be, holding the reins anyway? And a lot of us are already talking about a lot of these changes. So these are some points that I wanted to start off with. I'm going to mainly talk right now about briefly, I'm going to mention some of the approaches and challenges that the youth movement, youth climate action movement is facing, and what I think some of the changes need to be. And then I saw that a lot of people had questions about what they can do. So I'll speak about, as a young person, what can you do to tackle climate crisis and be part of the movement. So to begin with, I think the really important thing is all of us need to really reflect on our own lifestyles. And all of us have grown up in a world where, a lot of our economic systems, a lot of our other social systems have been around for a long time, and we've grown up in those. So we don't even realize a lot of the times how our simple actions are in fact causing a lot of oppression, marginalization, issues with environment, ecology, people. So we need to actually start by reflecting on our own everyday. And these are not just about which products you use, but also about how you interact with people around you, how you interact with ecologies around you, how you think about ecology? Is it something that's separate from you, or are you also part of your ecology? It's about thinking about how you're interacting with technology, thinking about all of these things. So it's about really reflecting about these things, and these things are really propagated through media and our education systems. So recognizing that and starting with that sort of reflection is very important. And I think the other big thing that we need to think about, especially as youth, is obviously there's a sort of sense of emergency, and there's a lot of climate anxiety because we are not sure what's going to happen. We don't know whether, 30 years, 40 years down the line, are we going to have a place to live? Are we going to have a habitable planet? And it's a very, very justified sort of fear that we all have. So I think but we have also recognized that the things that have led up to us being in this particular situation have been a result of processes and system changes for years. So solutions can't be, solutions to immediate climate action, which we need to stop greenhouse gases, those need to be right away. But in terms of longer environmental and social justice, you have to also understand that the process is slow sometimes, and the process has to be inclusive, it has to be diverse. And so it's about reconciling, the sort of immediate action that we all really want and really need, and also about the slow thinking and the reflection that needs to happen simultaneously in order for any action that we take to actually be just for everyone, not just for those who are leading it or whatever it is. So it has to be for everyone, and especially in order to put in something long term, right? It's not just about right now solving climate change and then letting all other issues be. It's about actually rethinking the entire system and finding a way that in the long term will be socially and ecologically just. So I think those are some essential places we need to start. And definitely when it comes to youth, we really need to rethink education. Education in our country is, we basically go to school, we learn how to mug up textbooks where within four walls it's not eco-centric, it's not child-centric. So we really have to take education back into our own hands as young people and think about, okay, I want to study what excites me. I want to not be studying in a classroom. I want to go outside. I want to think. I want to ask questions. And these are things that we have to start doing. We have to also really, really rethink our economic syllabus, because a lot of the climate crisis and the crisis that we are facing in terms of social justice, ecological justice, are a result of the economic crisis or the economic systems that we have in place. And we are still being taught the same economic system syllabus, both in school and in colleges especially. So we have to rethink our economic syllabus and finance syllabus in schools. And there's amazing networks which are doing this. So you can, reach out to them and think about that. The other thing that we really, really need to do as youth activism and youth movement in general is we need to think, and generally for climate crisis mitigation, we have to think of intersectional solutions, and we have to let those who are actually most affected by it lead the cause. We have to recognize that gender, caste, class, all of these actually play a huge role in climate when we talk about the impacts of climate change, and we can't ignore them. So when we talk about climate change and climate justice, it cannot be a sort of whitewashed green capitalistic way of talking. It's not just about switching your products. It's not just about talking about global warming once in a year. It's not just about World Environment Day. It's not just about these things, but it's actually about understanding what are some of the underlying systems that run especially our country, and how are they interlinked with climate justice, because it's going to impact those who are the most affected, who are the most vulnerable the most. So that is another extremely important point that we have to think about. And we have to think about the sort of, how do we also take a step back, sometimes, and really not even give the space, I think that's the wrong way of saying it, but I mean, just amplify and support those who are being the most affected rather than taking up the space ourselves. So that, I think, is one more thing we have to really think about. We also really need to think about getting more into politics and getting more involving more in policy making and with local government bodies. So like, how many of us know the way that our municipal corporation functions? Have you gone and just sat there in your municipal corporation for a day, spoken to some of the government officials who work in your areas? You'd actually be surprised. Many times they want to do, but they don't know what to do. They want feedback, but they don't know how to incorporate it. Sometimes they don't want it, and then you have to push for it. But it's actually a very interesting and very important thing to do for us youth, to actually go and start engaging with our local politicians and policymakers, and especially those of us who are inclined to it, to even get into politics, because that's where we can also make a very important but very needed change. We need to bring climate action into our political agendas. So that is, again, a very, very important part. And along with this, we definitely, like I mentioned earlier, it needs to be more intersectional, right? So when we think about youth activism, something that we've been trying to do in Yugma Network is really make it accessible in terms of language also. I know today the talk is in English. I'm sorry about that, but I hope that those of you who can understand it will also talk about everything that was spoken about today to your family and your friends who maybe were not able to access this talk, and is to really have conversations in your own languages, using your own cultural contexts, and talk about the climate crisis and the social crisis that we're going through, the humanitarian crisis that we're going through with COVID, and with in general also. COVID has just highlighted the social issues that we have in our country. So this is something that we also really need to do, which is to move out of the sort of English and westernized way of looking at the climate, ecological, social crisis. We really need to localize it to India and understand the systems that work within India. So that I wanted to really highlight. And when I also wanted to just mention that it's very, for anyone who is not youth, who is listening into this, it's very, very important to help us build those spaces for young people to actually get involved into this policy making. Any democratic, if we call ourselves a democracy, any democratic institution, it needs to have the capacity to receive, understand, and like work with criticism from people, from young people, and especially those who are thinkers or who are activists, those who are most marginalized or are working on ground. And so we need these guaranteed spaces for protest, for dissent, for feedback, for constructive criticism, and these actually need to be taken in, thought about critically, and then implemented as well. So this is extremely important, and those who are not youth need to help us to build this space so that more young people can come into these spaces and actually make a difference. So a lot of you had also asked in some questions, so how do you get involved? How do you start conversations with your family? How do you start, do climate? Okay, so I'm told my time is up. I'll just quickly wrap up in 2 minutes. So I want to just tell everyone who's listening that activism, when you say, it's not just about marching on the streets, it's also about education, it's about art, it's about having conversations, it's about self-reflection, it's about all your daily actions. So start with being more reflective. And when you start reading, so read a lot more, be more aware of current news. You can also get in touch with any local organization. There are a lot of local organizations that will be working in your area. Get in touch with them, ask them how you can help. We always need more people. So you can get in touch with us, ask us how you can help. Try getting in touch with your local policymakers or politicians. We can help you if you need with that as well. But definitely get in touch. And yeah, I would say after that, the most important point definitely is to start conversations and to really educate yourself about what is happening. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for stopping you in between. Of course, we can take more during our discussion session. And Anjali, it's really interesting to hear from you and from your own work and your own work experience as a youth activist. And it's really an influencing one. And I hope our students and other young participants got some spark from Anjali to initiate some climate actions. So moving on to our final panelist, Mr. Nagul Mohan, a research scholar from ETRI, to talk about highlighting the undesirable outcomes of climate action projects in India. Over to you, Nagul.
Thank you, Dr. Preeta. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to share my slide right now. Right. So thanks to KCLAS and a warm greeting to folks from SAPAC, CAG, KKNP. Thanks for making this happen. I work at an organization called ATRI, and my PhD work is trying to understand how climate action takes place and what is the potential for climate action to produce undesirable, unintended, and unanticipated outcomes. Now, the focus is really on subnational level action and how that happens. And I will get to what these mean, right? Unintended, unanticipated, and all. So, but let me start with this. Having heard all the fascinating talks, there's one thing that is for sure. We are at, in some sense, the cusp of climate action, right? A crossroads, if I may call it that. That we have had several international negotiations, and then we come down to the national level, and then you have these policies come up, and then state level policies come up, and then there's a lot of interaction between what is environment, what is climate change, what is the crisis, and then mixing all of them together. The next 10 years or the next 20 years or 30 years is really crucial for us to do good work, do good climate action. And I hope in this presentation I'll highlight that. So we're looking at global solutions to global problems. And in all those negotiations at a global level, we know that developed nations have, developing nations demand developed nations who have thrown a lot of these GHGs, a large chunk of it, into the atmosphere much earlier than we have. So we rely on them in many ways for technology transfers, financing climate action, very important, and technical assistance. So we realize that action is fed by policies. We have the Prime Minister's Council, which looked into forming the NAPCC, the 8+ missions. There are a few others which will hopefully come up. And then the states sort of look at that as a sort of a broad a goal as to how they can create their own. But we, I start with, so this is policy progress, right? But how do we move on to climate action progress from here? And there is a lot of work that needs to be done, as Mr. Datta has said. But there is still a lot of work that already has happened. Forest carbon projects, hundreds of small and medium hydropower plants, solar initiatives, wind farms, and so on and so forth, right? Even including coastal protection, some amount of climate smart technologies in agriculture, and so on. But how are they faring? We see them as good for the globe the moment you see a project, but is it working well? Has it had any impact, and so on? These are questions that come only after they start being implemented. So this is a daunting task of understanding this, and there is a very good chance that we'll wrap all of this up, right? So have you built a knowledge repository in some sense? So that is where I'll start off with. Let me get back to what is an undesirable outcome, right? To put it very simply, there are a lot of explanations to it. Any negative, unintended, and unanticipated outcome that emerges from the implementation of a program or a project, where the project proponent could or could not have objectively understood what needs to be taken care of. So, this is an explanation of what it is, but very often when it happens on ground, there is a political economy of climate action that comes into picture. It's important to note that there is accepted collateral damage that happens when these large projects, like a solar project, for example, play out on ground. So what I've done is I've just, panned out a few. I looked at these questions, and I'm trying to explain now what these concerns could be from the work that I've done till now. So there is a small literature review that I had done, and there is, of course, recent literature. So I wean out of that some possibly overlapping processes that are happening, but these are important. So I'll go one by one. So the most important problem that has come out of implementing climate action programs is social and ecological concerns. In the systematic literature review that I'm doing, 18 out of the 27 climate action projects report land as a highly contested resource. No surprises. Land is not infinite. It's finite. It's very hard to come by. That's been a major issue. A lot of cases where climate action has happened have disturbed elephant routes, have disturbed endemic fish populations, as well as increased fan-throated lizard populations, like in the picture that you see, simply because the predators vanish when windmills come up. They are in many ways ecological changes that we don't fathom that can happen when we do good projects. Land is made available through something very important, classifying land as something else, as barren, as unusable, and so on, wherein for generations people have continued to use them. So how do you look at the effect of marginalization when you start giving land to, say, solar projects or even windmills and so on? One very good example is the Poromboku land in Tamil Nadu. Which was given to earlier coal projects, and now have been started to give out to solar projects. Grabbing this ungoverned space is something that we need to really worry about. The next point is procedural and distributional issues. Dr. Malati spoke about it very briefly. What is important is good two-way information exchange between project proponents and the people who benefit, plus the people who are giving away land, access to resources like water, clean air, and so on. So there needs to be a conclusive, democratic discussion that people need to have. And there needs to be adequate representation of communities in them. For example, if that doesn't happen, we end up with signs like this in Sirsi, a sort of small town in North Uttar Kannada in Karnataka. It's very people have conveniently posted people to back off. There's no development here of any sort. Even if somebody with a good intention of having to cut carbon emissions by putting a SHP, for example. Yeah. So the next very important point is marginalization of certain groups with large-scale, neoliberal policies and projects like the one that you see have extremely uneven rehabilitation and compensation mechanisms. Even the best of the kind, for example, here when you see the Pavagada solar plant, lands are not sold, lands are leased. So the people would assume that things are all right. But health services, schools, good roads, as well as jobs that were offered to locals whose lands were being taken have not been fulfilled yet. So the other point is caste and class dimensions, right? How do you work around these in areas of these projects? So resource access plays a huge role and in who benefits from these projects. People with better resources, more land, will of course gain more. But the landless in this area who used to depend on ensuring that they can do by with just working on these lands have nothing to look forward to anymore. The final point is legal issues, which are really important. Now, this is a very important point to look at when you say what could be a legal issue with climate action, right? One, there has been no comprehensive legislation on climate change in India yet. We have policies, we have simple directives, but states broadly are left to their own devices. Two examples that come to mind: a waste to energy project and a wind farm. Both of them have had some trouble where locals from that area have gone to courts, have gone to high courts and even to the Supreme Court to challenge these. Of course, there are a number of cases with SHPs in Karnataka, small hydropower plants in Karnataka, where the courts had even, there's been the case has gone in favor of those protesting. So this is a protest photograph from the site that I've been working in coastal Karnataka. So what are the frameworks that we have to understand this? There are several. The two that have been important and been used globally, and I hope to use this in the local context in Karnataka, are maladaptation. And what is maladaptation? It's simply the negative effect of an intentional adaptation policy, which has an impact on the vulnerable, the targeted, or even external actors. Remember, I said some completely different downstream effects can take place, which erode sustainable development. And this is all that we're talking about, right? Where is sustainable development in this picture? Of course, the other one, sort of expanding from the maladaptation literature, is the boomerang effect, where all of these things can happen. Adaptation projects and mitigation projects can have their negative effects, but if left by themselves, there are possibilities where it can boomerang back onto the state. And there could be political effects, there could be national repercussions, which we don't really think of. So I'll stop with to wrap the presentation up. I want to try and see if I can leave you with these two thoughts. Are climate action projects getting co-opted by the neoliberal and regimented development paradigm in India? And what how do we get over that? And how do we come to terms with all else that is happening and think objectively about climate change? For example, right now we are in the middle of a raging pandemic. If we are to learn from anything from that, if the response, say, of the central government to the pandemic is anything to go by, the states really need to ramp up their work on climate change. They need to take things in their own hand and not look up to the center to take action. I'll end with this small contextual sort of a detail that I really go back to every time I look at these issues. One is the snapshots of success are offered without any contextual detail or any critical thinking, reflexivity of the nature of interventions and their intended and unintended outcomes over time, because this is a long fight that we're in. So I'll stop with that. And I think it's important that we take this discussion forward and see where it takes us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nagul, for sharing us the unintended and undesirable, and used another word also, unanticipated consequences of climate action, and bringing out the political economy of climate action in India. So I thank you all for your insightful sharing by touching all the aspects of climate action in the Indian context. So now I request the panelists to engage with the ideas that have come from other panelists. If you have any questions, comments to the other panelists, please ask. After that, we can go for questions from the participants. Yes, you can start, Nagur.
I was reading the questions and I thought there was something very interesting and topical, and that there is how do we learn from, and this question was in Hindi, so I wanted to address that. So it's actually quite interesting. How do we learn from indigenous communities to fight climate change, right? And Anjali, Akanksha, I think everybody covered bottom-up approach to looking at what the solutions could be. So, if anybody from the panel can give an idea of what could some of the challenges to this be of learning from, say, Adivasi indigenous communities in India.
So may I respond to this and a little broader point?
Yes, sir.
This experience is nothing new. We have worked with communities in Rajasthan. I did 3 studies with communities impacted by solar and wind. We did work with communities who are impacted with big hydropower plants. On the other hand, we have also seen as a response, and we have been also trying to encourage community groups to respond in their own way. But let me put one thing in the center. Like I have written in the starting 2009-10, I have written a lot of. We did collectively 50 CDM project study. We did presented in Doha in the UN, and what kind of things are happening, how development is not in at all a real consideration, and also the question that Nakulji was bringing out, that how it's in fact I was from 2009 I was intervening in the global climate governance system, but as an outsider, as a social activist. The last 3 years I was part of the board of one major UN group, the UNCTCN, and I have seen from inside. So it's not a conjecture. For the last 10 years, the global and national climate actions are being directed by See, everybody beats the drum of Paris Agreement. And we have been trying to bring this up right from 2008. In 2000, when we protested, it is very clear why the nations agreed to in the Paris Agreement, because that was the point where economic calculation showed that there is a massive opportunity for a transition to renewable energy for business and industry. So in a world where economies are slowing down, there is a new massive economic opportunity for industries as a sunshine area. So there is a cycle. Any industry, there is a cycle. So it's those who read a little bit, it's no secret that this is happening for the last 12, 13 years. And the UN agenda is basically directed, always a fight for us. I have been involved in this fight very deeply for last going to the UN, fighting both from outside, and as I said, last 3 years, I'll not take name. I'm on the board. I had to fight de-risking against de-risking private capital. These are the kind of language even the UN started using, not on its own, but it's a guided language. And leveraging capital, leveraging the finance. These are all things going on. So this is basically being determined by global finance capital, also global financial capital. That's known. But let me bring in a counterpoint. Today's world is not only in terms of energy, in terms, as I very quickly, and I missed out half the sectors, as I very quickly touched less than the tip of the icebergs, the entire system is geared to a very destructive, and ultimately, as Anjali said, and that's why we, as the earlier generation, we are still trying, shouting, fighting that this cannot go on, because we cannot pass on to our next generation a world which will not be really, it will be very, very unfriendly in the next 30 years. Thing is, we have to change almost every system, and no big change is achieved at zero cost. So there is this micro impact, there is that, I'm not talking about, don't misunderstand, I'm not talking about people should not be central to this. I have been ground level worker for 20 years, okay? But it has to be understood by all of us, no systemic change can be achieved without a cost being paid by everyone. Our challenge is, how do we bring a systemic change where the cost is shared by the rich and the powerful, and part of the benefit large part of the benefit goes to those who have been impacted by the climate change, who are again impacted by, there is a power failure, so my light level has gone down, doesn't matter. So those have been impacted by the physical changes in the climate, and those who are again impacted by the climate solution projects. These are, we call false solution, geoengineering, lot of this carbon market, carbon offset projects. I have written a lot against carbon offset, studied carbon market. I have argued in the CDM executive board in the UN against this. So one thing is, you have to understand, you have to pay a price. For that, passive listeners, passive viewers, passive readers won't work, have to get down on the field, have to fight, have to get arrested. I have been arrested by police. I have stood with Narmada Bachao and other anti-nuclear movements. We have got arrested, got very bad, not beating, but other thing from police. We have to get down to the street, and we have to pay a price. Only thing, the system, how it changes with this ulta, the way it is going. And there are, as I was saying, last point, we have encouraged communities in Rajasthan that instead of like Bhadla project, I made 2 visits when it was being made. And this year in February again, the largest solar project in India and probably in Asia, 2200 megawatt. Many other projects. We have encouraged communities using the Kushum scheme fund, community scale, community centric, community owned solar projects. And I have also supported Jaisalmer people who are sitting in Dharna in the High Court for solar and wind project. We have documented, we have published. So the challenge is, how do you turn it around? There is a need for complete systemic change. For that, right from the poorest to the richest, we'll have to pay some price. How do we change this equation? How do the richest pay the highest price? I'm not saying that would be desirable, but sitting here, I won't say the richest has to disappear. They have to disappear. The richest have to disappear, but the persons need not disappear. But how to achieve that is a major challenge. I'm not going into that. That's a major economic question. But how do we change this equation where the least price is paid by the most vulnerable? The biggest share of the benefit of the change, which is essential, goes to them. So that is the question. But again, without paying a price, that a little bit of change is there, that fellow lost a little bit. But who is losing a little bit? That is important. You will have to lose somewhere to gain a big thing somewhere else.
So any other question from the panelist? Or I think then we have a number of questions from our participants to be discussed with the panelists. And we have consolidated some of these questions for time management. So I'll start from a very general questions. We had been talking about climate change seriously for around 50 years. But we are now talking about climate crisis. There is a shift in the word change. So what is the actual turning point towards such a change? I think again, Soumya, yeah,
this change. There are several turning points in the world, not for the climate, but the understanding of ecology. And it started from 1972. 1972 is the turning point where the environment became a political and economic issue from being an environmental issue, from being an ecological issue. In the Stockholm Conference, the global leaders accepted this is a political and economic challenge, not only a quote-unquote environmental challenge. After that, the Rome report, the Brundtland Commission report, these are all contributions. But then again, the Earth Summit was the another point where at least the global, and it took 20 years. See, there is a 20-year cycle. Somehow, I don't know why. From 72 to 92, it took 20 years for global leaders to agree and act just to start UNFCCC, UNCBD, and UNCCD. These three, which are major UN Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, Framework Convention on Climate Change, UN Convention on Biodiversity, and UN Convention to Combat Desertification. These three crucial global compacts came out in 92. But again, the actions were, the initial period was really good. But Rio Plus 20, that was in 2012, where I was also present. I was not there in 92 because that was quite early time. I was in something else. There, the sustainability concept that economy, politics, and ecology, these needs to be integrated. This thing came in. But the crisis aspect came in only in a global understanding. Because I remember in 2010, the World People's Conference, there was a storm going on, very strong storm. So there's a background noise. So it's sudden gusting. And this is becoming regular feature. Every 2-3 days, there's a massive storm. The wind brings up. It's just started, just like that. And it will increase. Anyway, so when I just let me tell this. When I use this word climate crisis, I was one of the main speakers in World People's Conference on Climate Change and Rights of Mother Earth in Cochabamba in Bolivia, 2010 April. I was representing Asia in the case there. When I use this in my presentations, I use the term climate crisis. My European and American climate justice friend from CJN and others, climate justice now, it's a global network. They said, you are using an alarmist language. People will get scared. People will not act. 2018, when IPCC came out with the 1.5 SR, the special report, they gave us a very clear warning that we have played enough. The party is over. Unless right now you take drastic action, change all your systems, we are going to face a major disaster, not crisis. And then UN Secretary General language was, we are sleepwalking into a disaster. The climate change is running faster than we are. And we are running out of time. These are statements not from David Attenborough only, not from activists, by the UN Secretary General. So from after 18th, the global conscious leadership agrees that we are facing a major crisis. This is a defining challenge for 21st century, along with inequity and democracy. These three for the 21st century: inequity, democratic crisis, and the climate crisis. These three are going to be the defining challenge. This is admitted by 2017-18. So that is a turning point. And if you look at it, I'll end by this. Many of the sensible news media, Guardian, Columbia Review, Science Review, New York Times, sometimes everywhere, they are using the term climate crisis. Guardian has refused to use climate change or global warming. Guardian uses global heating. So 2017-18 is the last turning point as of now. We don't know when the next turning point will come, and we'll go on the street and revolt. That is the need of the hour. Just by doing webinars and learning a little bit, nothing will change. Because in the last 1 year, I have done 70 webinars on topics like this. Nothing changes. Unless people really understand it is my future, it's not just learning a little more. I have to get down. If I have to get beaten, I have to get beaten. But I have to change. Like we have done, we have stood in front of police, stopped the nuclear power plant construction, stopped coal mining. We have got down into the mines, occupied peacefully. Police arrested us. So you have to get down to that level. And if you don't do, you can also do another level. I'm just ending by this because a lot of engineering students, science students, you can actually try full energy, devote it for developing solutions, keeping most vulnerable, poorest people. How can they get maximum benefit? What will be your solution? Scientific, social, economic, try that. Let me just close the window.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Datta. So our next question is related to the differential vulnerabilities which Dr. Maladi speak about. So India is a country that experiences inequality in its multiple forms. The climate crisis definitely has severe impacts on the vulnerable sections of the country. So how far our governments are prepared to deal with this crisis, and what bottom-up approach you suggest?
If I may, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So the first thing is, I think there is a failure to recognize the marginalized groups, particularly because if you start looking at the entire governance challenge that we have, the communities who are most drastically affected with the points that have been raised in terms of the social and economic and political systems, who are the marginalized groups, they continue to remain marginalized and they continue to remain vulnerable, and they are the ones who will be affected by the crisis, because the crisis is their livelihoods are actually marginalized. And if you actually if I can relate with what is the panel is speaking of, if you start looking at the kind of education that we can have access to technology and so on and so forth, and the kind of livelihoods we aspire to have, and versus the communities where even education, where meeting daily needs, whatever, drinking water, you walk 16 kilometers to get access to that. I mean, n number of shelter issues. So a whole lot of things which are not being recognized, despite the fact that there is a kind of a dashboard mentality in terms of display of such kinds of achievements. But the reality is that the deprived are further deprived because there is no power and voice that gets represented into the local as well as at the subnational, national political systems. So one is that. Then the financial thing, which Shaumya has pointed out, and also I think Nakul has raised a bit, and Anjali has been referring to. See, the financial inclusion. Is there any financial inclusion? I mean, we have seen the COVID pandemic, and what is the kind of financial inclusion? Kinds of effects on their livelihoods. We indebtedness, which is there from 2018 debt survey, which is there. But from there onwards, even from 2019, the CMI reports, everybody is speaking of how the debt has increased. So there has been no financial inclusion. There has been no ways to redress the kinds of stress that they are facing. And one question was somebody talking about mental health issues. And I would say that stressed out communities continuously who are marginalized from across the spectrum, and hence they are what you call, the unrecognized zones. They are not recognized at all. So there is a need for actually putting these in at various
Yeah.
local levels, and then collectively, cohesively bring out a different kinds of knowledge, and put it out, put it up to the government, to the public, to the and there are so many other things, building what you call scientific temper, to even a rational process to understanding the policy making at the local level. What about how do we include the voices? There's a lot of things that we can do as social work professionals and students, because I think that is something which this institution caters to. So I feel that there is a huge agenda for us. And if we start at the local level, at the communities, and then try and link up with various sorts of experts and get this kind of a knowledge, and what is the knowledge interface that we need to have. As I think Anjali has talked about the language, it's actually everything is, cultural capital. See, this kind of a forum that we are using, this is definitely a cultural capital that we have. What about those? How will they communicate? How would that their voice will get represented? So we have a number of issues. And so when you say what is the kind of an alternative, so systematically we need to have mechanisms in place where their voice will be included. So procedures, institutional mechanisms have to have this. Also accountability mechanisms. We need to question, and so questioning spirit has not to be left out in all these. This is a major democratic challenge. And of course we are faced when we question, there are counter questioning, and there are those who will try and, as powers that be, they can control us. But I think we should not leave that questioning spirit. We have to question. We need to question the knowledge that we have. We need to question the governance that we have. We need to question to in such a manner so that we ultimately achieve what the human society deserves and desires, in terms of equitability, in terms of supporting each other. Sorry it took a long. Thank you.
No issues. Thank you. So we have another question to Akanksha. I hope Akanksha can answer. So the question is: there are several civil rights organizations and quite few environmental organizations working in different parts of India. So do you think it's high time we integrate human rights issues and ecological crisis? And how do we do such coalitions?
So at the end of my presentation, I did told about the three things: reflect, demand, search, and demand. At an individual level, anyone can follow that. Coalition, to make a coalition, that is a very it can be a challenging thing, or if uh, until you have a specific goal, like SAPAC is working towards climate change at South Asian level. So you can, as per your interest, you can look at what climate action you can work on, and for that particular thing, like you can work for women's, or you can work for the benefit of local communities which are impacted, like coastal communities. So like that, you can on that particular thing you can work, and you can make a coalition based on your objectives. You can work on that, and that you can also become a part of a civil society like that. Thank you. I think
Yeah.
did I left anything?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Akanksha. So we are like actually moving over time. So I have one more question to Nakul. So uh, so I think a labeling in climate action is a really important one. It's a really is something which is so different. So we have a question like, are all the environmental protection activities come under climate action? And also the another version of this question, another end of this question is that there is an expert framing of putting all larger projects in the narrative of climate action. For instance, Mudra Ultra Mega Power Project, which actually labeled as energy efficient production and avails CDM benefits, and later it became very controversial in terms of impacting the local ecology and economy. So, how do you view this labeling from two ends?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think till now, a majority of work that has happened in climate action has has boiled down to labeling. I mean, I'm being rather cynical, but that's what it has ended up being. Although started off as very ambitious and good for the globe, like I said. But this is a really important point to tackle, because what we end up doing is we take in prima facie whatever the project promises as good, and that it'll have a change. Yes, there will be some changes, but like I mentioned, there are certain outcomes that may not be good also, and how do you tackle them? So we of course have environmental activities that go on all over the globe, right? But the way I sort of decided how I chose my field sites, I can share as an example. There are several activities, like for example, within possible climate activities, some are not labeled as good for climate. Some are labeled as hydrologically good for that area. For example, watershed development. But watershed development is also being used as climate action in certain areas. Similarly, system of rice intensification. In many cases, SRI is used as a climate action project where we adapt to certain conditions in that area because of a possible climate impact or a current one. But on the other hand, people may use SRI to just conserve water. So it's hard to label what is and what is not climate action. But in the manner in which we go ahead from here, there needs to be a certain rigor in which we use to identify climate action. And Mr. Datta's first presentation sort of gave a very broad view of what needs to be done in different areas, right? And in that it will include what Mundra did too. So do we dismiss what Mundra did versus doing what happened in Mundra, and accept only things that which we can imagine as good climate action? Not so easy to answer. So there needs to be a much more wider discussion at every single level, even at the Gram Panchayat level. If there is a small watershed development program, or even a small dam across a river, which is even under 25 megawatts, exempt from EIA, but still discussions need to happen. Who is it good for? Who is benefiting from it? What are the things that will happen to our ecology? What are the impacts that we'll have to our livelihoods, and so on and so forth? So if these discussions don't happen, we'll end up labeling pretty much any environmental activity as climate action. and that is not such a great path to go down.
Yeah, if I might just add, Dr. Preeta, you're on mute.
Yes, Anjali, you can proceed.
Okay. I just wanted to add one point to this, which I think has been brought out, but it's also about like what is climate action may not necessarily be climate justice, and I think that is something that Bharti ji also brought out. You know, when she's talking about social justice and climate justice, and that is something we have to keep in mind, and something Soumyata also brought out, which is that we really need to think about the sort of localized solutions. It's not like a one thing fits all. It's not a one solution fits all areas and all people and all locations. We have to think about the localized solutions which would work in different places, as Nakulji also just mentioned. Something that might work in one place may not work in another place, and that ties in with the social and the climate justice aspect of it when we think about solutions. And it's also not just about technological solutions, but what are some of the other system changes and solutions that we can actually look at. I just wanted to add that.
And by the way, if anyone is interested to know the Mundra situation, Mundra, there is a confusion. Tata Mundra and Adani Mundra, these two are different and they have different impacts, very, very different impacts. In fact, I worked with those fish workers and salt panners communities. And in 2012, I wrote a report. I coordinated a fact-finding mission. That report is available in the public domain, 2012 public. It's called The Real Cost of Power. So if you understand how such a project which has got fund from World Bank, from Asian Development Bank, from BNP Paribas and a host of international financial groups and Indian financial organization, what kind of impact this quote unquote clean technology project, supercritical boiler driven projects can bring, you can see that there are a host of impacts, and it's not mostly by Adani, it's mostly by Tata Mundra. Adani has a different kind of impact. Tata's project, because of their change of technology, one is open cycle, one is closed cycle in the cooling. So there is a lot of data in there, around 40 pages, I think, report. You can say this is on a public domain. Anyway, I think 6.
Yes, seems like Dr. Preeta has dropped off.
Maybe internet connection. Our connection, thankfully, is on, because there is a sudden storm which I went out and saw. 2 of the pots are broken, things are falling down. Anyway, these have increased quite a lot. Without warning, sudden violent storm and rain.
Yeah.
And we are just now dealing with the impact of Cyclone Yash. Because in spite of earlier warning from us, people could not understand the huge storm surges. In fact, more than 3 lakh houses have totally been destroyed. So we are working with the fish workers community there right now. So this, my request is any group who have either, there are 5, I'm sorry I am intervening, 5 kind of communities in India who are suffering the most, will not, it's not that will suffer, who are already suffering the most. And if you can join with any one of them, try to understand what are the impacts happening, what are the vulnerabilities, and bring up resilient solution. One is the mountain communities, second are the coastal communities, third are the urban poor. They are one of the most impacted but not yet recognized. Fourth are the central Indian marginal and small farmers. These ones. And the 5th category are who are dependent on some of the resources where the so-called climate solutions are coming. So these two, like in Rajasthan, like you also pointed out, Nakul, Rajasthan, Gujarat, in Gujarat, Kutch, there are people who are neither poor nor landless, they own large lands, but now the climate solutions are encroaching on their land. So these kind of communities, not very large segment, but the other 4 are very large numbers. So there's a critical need that we work with them. And there are some, I think, very just informational question, like how much is I was just looking at it, how much is the energy, renewable energy, those are all available, 28% as of now. And if you include large hydro, it will be 34-35% out of the 40% commitment. So those are accounting tricks by the government. So those kind of questions can be searched out by 2-3 clicks on the computer.
Am I audible? I'm facing certain technical glitches.
Yes, now
am I audible? Yeah. So we have
yes.
One of our undergrad student, Miss. Yes, I hope I'm audible. So we have one of our undergrad students,
Yes,
Valiama, is joined with us today. She's doing her bachelor's in commerce and an active member of Environ Club. So she has some questions from the perspective of youth and their role in climate action. Over to you, Valiama.
So good evening, everyone. This is Valiamai, and happy to meet you
Valiamai,
all. And
you are on
hope
mute.
you're all doing. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So good evening, everyone. Happy to be a part. And so without more delay, I would like to get in the question. First, I would like to ask Ms. Anjali, so how to involve children in this climatic action and sensitize them on climate justice? So do you think children have a big role to play in?
Okay, so I think one, it's really unfair that we've put this burden on children to deal with such large systemic issues and things that have to be really be solved by the previous generation, which is still running a lot of the policies. I think it's not fair to say children need to be going and fighting for climate justice when they need to be having a childhood and playing. I think the reason that children are not being able to connect with those things around us is because we have so much anxiety, we have so many mental health issues, we are so disconnected from things, and we spend our entire childhood fighting for things which should be basic right. I think that's not something that's fair to ask. I think the way that children need to be engaged is that we need to rethink our education systems. I really think that's how children engage. I think we need to have more child-centric education, more education based on play, more education based outside of textbooks, without textbooks if possible. I mean, I never gave a single exam until 9th grade. And then I went and I gave an exam in 9th grade and I was fine. I really was fine. You know, we don't need to be giving exams in 3rd grade, 2nd grade and mugging up things from that time. I think I was very fortunate to get an alternative education system almost my entire life. And the 1 year that I went to an Indian education system, I felt like I lost my love for every subject. And that's really sad. That's truly sad, you know. So I think that's how children need to be engaged. Before talking about climate justice and climate crisis, we need to be talking about things that are beautiful, things that make us feel good, about reconnecting, about spending more time and not just talking, but actually spending more time in surroundings, in areas around us. So I would say that is really how we need to be involving children in this process and allowing for that natural growth and to happen and to be able to provide that space, which I think is slowly we're losing that space.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And my next question is to Ms. Akanksha. So, as a student, what's the first step to get into the research, and what will be the research in climate crisis and climatic action? Like, what will be the scope in it, and what are the procedures that we need to follow as undergraduate students?
Specifically for undergraduate students, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that is very initial level. At that level, very few people know about what is actually research. So I think it is better to go for internship first, and that is also as per your interest, in which field you are interested in, because there are so many fields of research. biodiversity conservation. There's like in environment also there are so many fields, environmental laws, and there are social issues you can join. There are so many institutions, so many organizations, so many civil society organizations. You can join them, and based on that you can work with them, you can get experience. Um and that definitely that will help you in setting your goals for further research, for doing for stepping into the research field, um, in the main research field. So at initial level I think it is good to start with volunteering or as an intern with the organizations that are already there.
Okay, thank you. So, given the increasing participation of youth in climate activism and the increased scrutiny of the government on such activist groups, what are the other avenues through which the youth can be involved more in climate action, and how youth can work with the government and engage with good activities more?
Would you like me to take this, or would someone else like to take this?
Like anybody
You
is
go
okay.
ahead.
Okay, sure. So I think it's a quite large question that you've asked. I feel like I touched on some of these when I was talking earlier, but definitely when we say climate action, one, the only way to do action is not to just, criticize things that are happening. You can also do it, like I said, education is a huge part of it. If you're an artist, you can do it through your art medium, through writing. If you can also just do it by having conversations. Sometimes we really undervalue the, so to say, smaller actions, but I think there are even more required actions, like for example having a half an hour long conversation with your grandparents who live at your house. It's a task. I have to say it's a task, and it's a huge change that you're bringing about just by doing that. So I think that is one thing to understand. Secondly, when it comes to the crackdown, how many people are they going to arrest? I really want to just ask this at some point, like, we unfortunately can't, we don't have the luxury to keep being scared of it, and it's going to happen. We have to be, that's something that we have to, it's not exactly my reality to tell, but a lot of people have gone through it, and it, I'm sure, is traumatic and not at all something that you want to go through. But if we are fighting for basic rights at this point, then I feel like if you're fighting for it and if you are okay being vocal about it, it's something that we need to do. And at some point, I think there's going to be some sort of reconciliation that's going to have to happen, because how much are we going to keep clashing and opposing? So I think that is there. And when it comes to engaging in policy levels, I think we've definitely seen more. I've personally seen a lot more young people get into policies, policy making and politics. Some of my friends are into politics now. But definitely, I think it just starts with being more aware. Everything is political, like we like saying, but do we truly practice the fact that everything is political in our lives? Do we understand that caste systems are all around us? Do we understand that gender systems are all around us? Do we understand all of these things? So it's really about understanding those first, even that is political. And then thinking about, like I mentioned, engaging with local policymakers. They're actually quite easy to reach. You can just call them up. They all have public phone numbers, public emails. You can write to them, call them up, engage in that way. Otherwise, be aware of current news. Read current news in your local language as well as maybe in English, whatever you prefer. That's a good way to engage and to amplify. I think amplifying what other people are doing is a good way. And Akanksha mentioned quite a bit about how you can support civil society groups and NGOs. So you can get involved with any civil society group or NGO also, and you can talk to them. If you're in college, you can talk to your professors. There's resources everywhere, and you don't need someone who's necessarily qualified to find someone who you can learn from. You can learn from every person around you, even more so from those who are right around you, who maybe we tend to invisibilize in our daily life. So I think it's about really that self-reflection and understanding things around you too. I think that's how you'd get involved. And like I mentioned about the involvement with government and the ways you can be active.
Yeah. So yeah, how do you think? What are the initial ways that we can do in the at the college level? So how can we start, like a basement or foundation? So what will be the first steps to do?
Directed at me or Akanksha?
Sorry?
Was the question to Akanksha or me?
Yeah, anybody can take it up, no problem.
Akanksha, would you like to take it and I can add? Or
You can add, yeah, you can take it.
oh, okay, good. Sure. So you said what is the initial steps we can take at a college level, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think one is something I've noticed, at least in colleges, whatever we tend to learn in the classroom stays in the classroom. And especially if you're in a college where you're learning about social justice, and like many colleges now have foundation courses on social issues and environmental issues, kind of taking those out of the class as well and seeing those in your college space. There's a lot of discrimination and a lot of issues that are within your college itself. I think recognizing those. So even though I go to a so-called very progressive and liberal sort of college, there's still plastic spoons, cutlery, there's no waste segregation, there's a very, very poor management of water and energy. And I think that's really sad, you know. So I was working in the environment ministry. We have like student government format. So even just seeing, do you have an environment club? Do you have an environment, some group of students working on environmental issues within your university, on social issues within your university? Is there still caste-based, class-based, gender-based discrimination in your university? Are your infrastructure sustainable within your university? If you're saying that you are a progressive, inclusive space, any university, be it any college space, I think as students, we have to question whether it truly is. Is it financially accessible for everyone, linguistically accessible for everyone? And as students of any university, you have to start asking these questions. We are still trying to get plastic cutlery out, and it's been 6 years. It's really sad that it takes that long, you know. So you have to constantly be at it. That's really where it starts. I'm sure if you like send, if people have WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, start finding, just asking who else is interested in this. You can make like little groups of people who are interested, make little WhatsApp groups or whatever it is. You can get together to have conversations, start, identify what are the issues that you see. Try to involve those who are from either Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi backgrounds in these discussions, in people who are most marginalized, people from, all different backgrounds. Please try to involve students in your college from those backgrounds also in these discussions, and see if you can identify some of these issues, and then you can take it up with your management. You can take it up with your faculty if you're comfortable with your faculty. And you can start that way. A lot of faculty would also be interested in joining, I think. So you can float an email to your faculty. These are just some ways you can get started, I think. But to identify the issues is very important first in your college level. And then, of course, after, even if you can address these issues within your college, that's a really big thing that you've done. You don't have to necessarily address the issues outside of a college right away. Start within your own college, because that's the community you're currently a part of.
Sure. So thank you so much for responding to everything. Thank you for giving this opportunity, and happy to be a part.
So yeah,
let
so
me
we
just
have
add a point. Since you are in, I'm giving very specific example. Since you are in Coimbatore, try to be aware of what is happening around Tamil Nadu. Like Piyush Manus, you might be knowing, he would not be far off. Uday is not also far off. In what is that? Nagir Kaveri. Sometime invite those people who have led environmental movements in those areas, big or small or medium, doesn't matter. Just listen to them. Few other people, like I know a lot of people from Kudankulam movement, the Sundaramma and all the young, older women. I'm very friendly with them, though they don't understand my language, I don't understand the language, but we have full communication. I've been there many times. So invite some of those people, listen to them, why they are fighting, why they are protesting, why the government is getting into their houses and breaking their boards and TVs and beating them up. What is the matter? Just try, invite them, listen. As Anjali said very rightly, right at the beginning, you don't have to go and take a jhanda and do some protest. But try to understand, go a little deeper. And those people are the best who can really give their own perspective. As we are saying, the vulnerable people, people who are getting the stick, if you listen to them, maybe the understanding will be even more clearer. And that's very easy to do. Just invite and organize a talk and listen to them. Unless the institution put a stop to that. So that is the problem. Anyway, thank you. I'll not.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have one more person joined with us today, like Mr. Vijay Babu, a Coimbatore-based environmental activist, to ask certain questions from the grassroots level perspective. So he's an active member in various civil society organizations in Coimbatore, and he's one of the coordinator of Kayankudaram wetland regeneration and restoration project, which our department is also taking part with them. So over to you, Vijay Babu.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Happy evening to everyone. And once again, I thank everyone for enlightening us in this valuable event. And I have a question. On one side, we are talking about economic development. The other side, we are using more natural resources. As Mr. Datta said, the utilization of natural resources should get decreased, or it need to change its transformation into very minimum utility phase. My question is that we are keep on using natural resources in the name of economic development, but hardly it hits the local people, those who are dependent on that natural resources, how they can balance if such mineral or this natural conflict occurs.
May I come in? If, probably there are two sides of that question. Or you want to explain, or should I just give you some short answers? See, there are two sides.
Yes, you proceed.
Two angles from where you can approach this. One is from just the academic, technical knowledge component, right? One part, and that is not the best part, but that part is in that part. If you look at the world today, for the last 10-12 years, there is a huge thrust on three kinds of economies. Not the present economy is a linear economy, that you put in resources, you put in capital. Think of a black box where the resources are put in, capital is put in, labor is put in, and resources are not only mineral, the nature. And on the other hand, on the other side, you get products, you get waste. These two you get generally, waste products and useful products. Though waste is our own conceptualization. Today, from the formal economic side, there is a huge push, and this again is from the industry, from the capital side, for a circular economy for the last 10-12 years, where you don't just take it out and throw it, but you take it back. You bend the cycle, bring the waste and everything back into the box, and reduce inside the box. You change, so the production efficiency go. That is from a typical industrial civilizational point of view. There is another point of view, another economic model, which is called donut economy. Okay, there are a lot of material available that you can read those. Which is donut economy is what, as most of us are saying, our understanding goes even beyond the donut economy. But donut is a ring. This typical Western, you eat a bread which is shaped like a ring. That's called a donut. So the donut economy is that on the outer circle, the largest number reside. So how do you inside the economy, how do you redesign? And one of the channel is redistributive economic functioning. That means where it is now concentrating, your economic model has to distribute it in a much more equitable fashion. So donut economy is one approach to that. Okay, there is a third approach, and where part of it is already being seen in the world, which is called a sharing economy. So there are other things also. I'll not go into details. I'm only trying to bring up that this present centralized, linear, accumulative economy, which only shows at GDP growth, not at how it is distributed, not at what cost it puts, which we call externalization of cost. So both the circular economy, sharing economy, they have to, by force, they have to internalize the externalized cost, but they have to also show the redistributive character. So there are these three, what I said again, one is the circular economy, which the standard economic financial groups are saying. Second is the donut economy, is more equitable, more just, but not fully. And the third is the sharing economy. Okay. So these three, there are already a lot of work done, and how the transition will happen, the transition economic processes, all these are global debates. How the richer segments will grow down, which is called degrowth, where the richer and industrial will grow, which will, they will not grow upwards, they will grow downwards, and that freed resource will be shared by those who have not got. So the degrowth, all these are part of these new models. So there are a lot of these already being discussed, but I will give a warning that the Green New Deal that the US and some Europeans are pushing, there are a lot of dangerous things being there. These are a lot of what Anjali probably said, greenwashed. A lot of greenwashing is going on. Some old models, some same concentrated thing, some green paint you do, so it looks green, or you term it green. So, but the three things I said, circular economy, the donut economy, and the sharing economy, and the degrowth. Degrowth is also an economic model. All has to have a redistributive component. So you can go and see this. And some mixture of sharing economy and donut economy. These probably will give us an intermediate time, till the time sometime in the future we reached an ideal condition, which is not in any time soon, definitely not. But at least in the interim, in this period of transition, the donut economy and the sharing economy and degrowth shows us some real good, equitable, and just way. I don't know whether you have seen the sharing economy discussions or papers or books. These are very interesting. If you have not seen, request everybody to read both the sharing economy and the donut economy concepts and how they are developing, and the degrowth debate.
Okay. Hello. Hello.
Preeta has gone out again. Connection.
No, I am here. Vijay Babu, you can continue with one more question.
I think her connection is poor.
Hello.
Okay, now you are best.
Is it audible?
Yes, you are audible.
I'm audible.
Someone from the organizers, please take over. I think connections are giving problem.
Vijay Babu,
Hello.
you can continue. Yes. So I will pose one more questions which Vijay Babu actually want to ask because of the poor connection. So actually, how do we empower small farmers who are actually the climate victims, and how can we support them? And that's one of the questions actually he wants to ask. I think Maladi ma'am can answer.
Yeah. Okay. See, there are already from the climate sustainable agriculture, there are actions which are related to supporting what you call small farmers, particularly on millet farmers. In fact, 2023 is supposed to be the millet year to be declared. So that is something which, if we can have resilient agriculture in terms of small farmers who are producing these kinds of local crops, and local in the sense and local ways in terms of organic kind of a production systems, instead of using heavy pesticides and heavy what you call chemical kind of based farming techniques. And also, if when we talk about millets, then there would be some kind of, the water guzzling that we are talking about, or water stress districts, and the kinds of water intake in these farms, those could be reduced if we shift from the kind of intensive sort of rice production systems to water guzzling crops to millet based farming. That's one of the things, that those kinds of support systems can exist, but they have to exist simultaneously, connections, networks with consumers, and trade support for them. For example, during this transition phase from this shifting, they need to be supported. So that's one of the other things that we want to do for the small farmers. And we also are we need to say that the food systems, and in terms of food sustainability, we have enough experiences from the ground. Deccan Development Society and others have shown particularly how food security could be beefed up with these kinds of millet based production systems, including their infusion into public distribution systems. So there is a lot of support systems to be built in, institutional mechanisms, as also trying to regain the knowledge of these communities who have been practicing such small farmer agriculture, and to sort of go for a kind of a chemical less agriculture. That is also another thing that I think that again institutional support needs to be there for that, which means the kind of policy decisions which are regarding to those also need to be questioned. And so a whole lot of package dealing should be there, but at the same time, the work with communities is something that we need to support, because without looking after these communities, trying to work with them, there is no way we can take these kinds of things forward. Because even any institutional push, any kind of an incentivizing, but what is the kind of situation on the ground, we need to assess that and we need to support them.
Yeah, so we will take one last question. It's related to COVID-19, so the present condition. So I thought will take it up. So how the COVID influences or affect India's climate action? I hope Nagul can answer. COVID-19 and climate action.
Hard to say at the moment, simply because we don't have enough data. But one thing is for sure, a lot of resources, government resources, and even private resources are being diverted, and rightly so. What does it mean for current climate action work that is happening? Not sure, but if we don't fight the pandemic and really work hard to vaccinate everybody and hopefully stop it, things are going to get difficult. Our collective memories of what climate change must not be shadowed by COVID-19. And there are bigger problems if we don't fight the climate crisis right now. COVID is just a byproduct of all that we've done to nature. And if we don't stop fighting the climate crisis, it's going to get more and more difficult. Unfortunately, that's all we know for now. If anybody else would want to chip in with some data. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'll add a couple of points in that. One on actually what we know, what has happened to India's climate action, that's what we already know. One point is India's states SAPCCs, the State Action Plans on Climate Change, their first revision, that is the second version, was supposed to be ready by 2019. All the states were in the process of revision. That has got stalled. Many of these processes have delayed, and some of the national missions, they have also delayed their things because of COVID. But the larger impact that has already happened and will happen, given examples of other countries. India's economy, like most other countries, but India's has a very, very strong response to COVID lockdowns, not the COVID crisis, the lockdowns. India's economy has nearly crashed. First year, 2020, this first financial year, Last year it was around 10 point some percentage. This year, just now we have the data 7.3% on that reduced basis. That means economy has really crashed, and crashed means it has really devastated something like 50 to 60 crore people at the bottom. Casual workers, migrant workers, many others. The rich has not suffered much. They have actually gained, and the middle class also didn't suffer much, though they lost, some of them lost job. So what is the reaction that we are seeing? Because you have to also follow what other countries are responding to. There is an overriding desire and pressure for a very fast surge in economic activities, restarting economic activities. And in that, several sectors are getting a boost. Coal and oil are getting a big boost in many countries. So we are seeing, like in China, when China recovered from COVID crisis, when it managed to contain it, its emission shot up again. And that is going to be the case in 99%, which is in IPCC term, extremely likely India's climate action is going to go back by 10 years. Will focus our government, and there will be a political demand, forget about environment, restart the economy, give the economy a push, and that is already happening. If you have followed, if you have analyzed, we did analysis of the so-called packages, COVID packages. These are giving push for quote unquote dirty economic processes, and that will happen. There is a political push, there is an economic push. So our climate action will go back. It was in the second tier, it will go back to the fourth tier of priorities. So that is more or less given. So we'll have to face that additional challenge.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, sir.
One thing I support. One thing I second what Nakul said, that, and I want to emphasize, this COVID crisis is not the creation of the virus. It's the creation of our economic system, our globalized economic system. The virus didn't come out on its own and spread. It was our own defective, faulty, and vested interest economic system. By knowing what can happen, we continued those economic relationships and global economic relationships. So unless we take a lesson, what we seem not to be learning, this is not the last, this kind of pandemic. We are going to have it in 10 to 20 years again, or maybe 15 years, which will not be a happy situation.
Yeah, so thank you, sir. So we have a lot more questions are pending, but it's really we are going out of time. So I'm yeah, so we are stopping here, and I hope we have a very interesting session today, from understanding the basic climate concept of climate action to how do we label the climate action, labeling, and the consequences of climate action, and the multiple vulnerabilities, and the who are the drivers of climate action. So I hope we touched about almost all aspects of related to climate action. So without any further delay, now I invite Ms. Jayasurya, our MSW student, to propose a vote of thanks. Over to you, Jayasurya.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good evening to all. I convey my heartfelt appreciation for this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks. I begin by expressing my deepest gratitude to the versatile panelists among our presence today, Mr. Soumya Dutta, Dr. Malati Adasamali, Ms. Akanksha Tiwari, Ms. Anjali Dalmia, and Mr. Nakul Mohan Heble, who have enlightened us profoundly about climate action, its importance, the agency of the situation, and its implementation in the Indian context. I further extend my thanks for the partnering organizations, South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis, SAPAC, Citizen Consumer and Civic Action Group, CAG, and Kovilpalayam Neernilai Padukaappu Amaippu. I also take this opportunity to specially express my deep regards and gratitude to the management of Kumaraguru Institution. I am elated to give thanks to Dr. Vijila Kennedy, Principal, and Dr. Shanti, Vice Principal of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science. I extend my warmest gratitude to Dr. Emmanuel Daniel, Faculty Lead, School of Social Work, and Dr. Preeta, Faculty and the Program Coordinator, School of Social Work class, for bringing together this wonderful panel that has helped us in fostering the importance of climate action among young minds. I thank Mr. Vijay Babu, KNNPA, and Ms. Valliyamai, student of 2nd BCom class, for their active engagement in the post-panel discussion. I extend my sincerest thanks to the Department of Visual Communication class, Professor Leo, and his students of Visual Communication, Mr. Sandeep Leo and Ms. Anupama, for providing technical support for this event. I am extremely thankful for the volunteers, Mr. Kamlesh and Ms. Aishwarya SNM from School of Social Work, who have assisted us in the program. I take pride in thanking my co-host, Ms. Namrata Varshini, who carried the session with grace and vibrance. Lastly, I greatly appreciate the presence of all the audience who have taken time to attend the panel discussion in order to bring change, and I believe have been enlightened by the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for
Thank you,
this
Joshua.
interesting
Thank
discussion.
you very much.
We can exit.
Thank you, Dr. Preeta. It was nice meeting all of you, fellow panel members as well. Thank you for the talk.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Have a nice evening. Goodbye.